Sometimes you see a big, high stakes summit at the White House and you think you know what it's about. On the surface, this one was all about peace and security. But what if the official story completely missed the point? We're going to dive into one source that claims what really happened was a massive shift in global power, hidden right there in plain sight. So, was this a peace summit, or was it a masterclass in power politics? Let's break down the argument. Okay, so let's set the stage with the basics, right? The facts that everyone reported. In August of 2025, you have Europe's heavy hitters and President Zelensky flying into Washington, D.C. for a major meeting with President Trump. The official line? It's all about bringing peace and security to Europe. Simple enough. But here's where it gets interesting. What if that whole meeting, the handshakes, the talking points, what if that was all just window dressing? An article from Coffee and COVID puts forward this really fascinating theory that the real story wasn't in the deals being made, but in the performance, the pure political theater of the whole thing. And look at this central claim. I mean, wow, that is a heck of a statement. The author isn't just saying it was a good meeting for the US, they're arguing it was a deliberate, total teardown of the global power structure as we know it. So how on earth do they even start to make a case like that? Well, the way the author builds this argument is piece by piece, focusing almost entirely on the theatrics. And they claim it all started before the leaders even stepped foot inside the White House. So the picture the author paints isn't one of careful, coordinated diplomacy. They call it a sudden stampede. The idea is that these leaders scrambled to get to Washington, demanding a seat at the table because they were so anxious to show they were backing Zelensky. But crucially, the author argues they had no idea what kind of stage they were about to walk onto. And that supposed unpreparedness, well, the source claims that was absolutely key to what happened next, because once they were all inside the Oval Office, the actual policy discussions took a backseat to something else, how the entire event was staged. We're talking the layout of the room, the chairs, everything. Apparently, it was all part of a very specific, very carefully constructed narrative. And I mean, listen to this description from the author. It is just brutal. They frame the whole thing not as a negotiation between equals, but like a reality TV show, a showdown designed from the very beginning to have one clear, obvious winner. So here's how the author claims that showdown was physically set up. Just look at the contrast they describe. On one side, you have Trump, alone, at the Resolute desk, in a big, high-backed leather chair, surrounded by all the symbols of American power. And then you have the other world leaders. They're described as being kind of crammed together in smaller, identical wooden chairs. The author even compares it to a parent-teacher conference, and you know exactly who's the principal in that scenario. So, okay, the room itself was the stage. But the author argues that the real mission here, the whole point, was to capture that image, to create a photograph that would intentionally and very publicly shatter decades of diplomatic tradition. And this right here is the absolute key to the entire argument. The author insists that none of this was an accident. The visuals, the seating, the photos, it was all supposedly planned out, storyboarded like a movie scene, all to send one unmistakable message about who was really in charge. And to really drive this point home, the author draws this stark contrast. They say, look, historic summits, think Yalta or Versailles, they were always staged to at least suggest a meeting of equals. Everybody tried to project balance and parity. But this summit, they argue, was designed to do the exact opposite. It was meant to show a naked power imbalance, treating the visiting leaders less like partners and, as the author puts it, more like vassals. So, what was the punchline to all this careful staging? Well, according to this source, the European leaders walked right into a trap. They came to Washington thinking they were acting as powerful allies, but instead they were turned into human props for a photograph that basically screamed American dominance. All right, so if the optics were the main event, what about the actual deals that were made? Well, the source argues that the final agreement only served to lock in the new power dynamic that the visuals had already established. So just look at how the reported outcome flows here. According to the source's analysis, Europe gets the heavy lifting, the responsibility for Ukraine's security, but the US gets to play the role of coordinator and, of course, arms dealer. And then notice who's making the big unilateral calls. Trump rules out NATO membership. Trump is the one setting up future meetings. The author claims this just cements the visual message. Europe is on management duty, but America is the decider. So this is what the author means when they talk about a new world order. It wasn't signed in a treaty. It was established in a picture. They argue the photo simply said the quiet part out loud, that the illusion of partnership was over. In this new dynamic, the US is the decider, and Europe is now just the entourage. So, when you boil it all down, what's the ultimate point the source is trying to make here? Well, the argument is pretty clear that the whole peace and security title was just a convenient label. The real summit wasn't about policy at all. It was about symbolism, it was about establishing dominance, and it was about pure, unadulterated one-upmanship. And the author really lands their final point with this incredibly provocative metaphor. They're essentially saying that Europe let its guard down for just a moment, and that was all the opening that was needed to completely flip the old order on its head. In the end, this whole argument really hinges on a fascinating and pretty challenging idea that in today's world, a picture can be way more powerful than a treaty. It leaves us with a really fundamental question. Can a single photo op, if it's staged perfectly, actually redefine reality and change the entire world order? It's definitely something to think about.